What up, guys? It's Mr. E. I'm here to talk about the Bonespear Necromancer on Diablo IV. Some of you might be looking for an endgame variant, and my variant covers solo Lilith, Uber. It covers nightmare dungeons up to 100, and it covers doing 4-man carries, soloing world bosses, pretty much all endgame, except for PvP. It's not the best variant for PvP. But I hope what you get out of this video helps you in your journey through Bonespear Necro. Enjoy. First things first, I'd like to welcome you guys into Bonespear Necro. It's a really fun build, and out of all the builds I have tried in this game so far, it's one of my favorites. It is very easy to use, it is very spammable, it is very well played at range. So if you're afraid to be close up, this is a really good build for you. And as variants go, mine might be different from what you might see on YouTube or on other, channels, max roll, all the build guides, but it is very similar and uses a lot of the same mechanics as all of them as well. So take what you see and, choose whether you want to run it or not. It's completely up to you. This is just my variant, and this is the way that I enjoy playing it. There's obviously going to be other variants that might be better, but this is the one that worked for me the best out of everything I've tried. So let's go ahead and jump into the skills and look at what I'm using, and I will explain what to swap and when to swap depending on what you're doing. So let's jump into the skills real quick. Alright, first thing is the basic attack. We went ahead and went with Bone Splinters, and as you go into leveling that up, you can decide whether you want to do Bone Splinters cause enemies to be vulnerable, or Bone Splinters have a chance to give you an extra critical strike chance buff. The way that I went into this was we want as much crit as possible. So we can get vulnerability from something else, and I'll explain that in a second. So we went ahead and went with more critical strike chance, because that for us is big. The more critical strike chance we have, the better, and if we can get close to 100%, then GG. Next, we move down the line. You want to go into Bonespear. Bonespear is your main damage. It is where you're going to be putting a lot of points. So you want to spec into it probably at the beginning, maybe going into vulnerable, into supernatural Bonespear, until you can get down a little bit further in the tree. This will be your best bet towards getting vulnerability and not going into it up here. As you progress through the tree, you'll eventually swap from supernatural into paranormal, and the reason why is because there's another way to get vulnerability, and you don't have to get it from Bonespear itself, so you might as well plug in more damage. So you want more critical strike chance, and you want 2 additional shards to come off whenever you return the Bonespear. So instead of 3, you will get 5 shattering pieces, and the damage adds up quick, so you definitely want that. You want to plug into the unliving energy. This will give you more max essence, and the reason why we want to stack max essence is because it's kind of like mana, right? The more mana you have, the more you can spam your skills, and that's a big part of this build. You want to be able to spam as much as possible, and a lot of your skills that I will be aspects and stuff I'll be talking about as we move on require you to have a certain amount of essence to be able to benefit from. So we want to stack as much essence as possible. Imperfectly balanced. This was not working at the beginning of the league. We only were able to plug in 1 point, and when I beat Lilith in this video, I was only using 1 point. I didn't have the ability to plug in 3, so having this actually will benefit you more than it did me. And basically you just get a lot more damage out of your Bonespear, even though it costs you a little bit more. If this happens to be something you find draining your essence way too quickly, you can always do like me and just spec 1 point if you want. or you can just, re-roll some of your gear to have more resource cost, or, lucky hit gives resource. So whatever works best for you, but having 3 points in this might be ultimately better. Down here we want hewed flesh, and we want this because we want to get as many corpses stacked up as we can. Corpses is a huge part of this build, so the more corpses we can stack, the better. Moving down, we want Blood Mist. Blood Mist is huge. Not only will it give us immunity during phases like Lilith's one-shot mechanics and one-shot mechanics that you can run into in high nightmares, or mechanics where you get stunned or frozen or something. This allows you to jump straight out of it. But when you level it up to Ghastly Blood Mist, it also produces corpses every second. So we want to have that 100%. Is very, very nice, and it also allows you to stack extra damage early when fighting single target bosses because of the corpses, and I'll explain that as we move on. Moving on, we want Corpse Explosion. It's not important to plug more than 1 point into it. You can if you want, but I just decided 1 Corpse Explosion is enough, and the only reason we have Corpse Explosion to begin with is because we want to stack extra damage from absorbing corpses, and Corpse Explosion is one of the only ways to do that. So 1 point into there. Moving down, we want to put points into Grim Harvest and Fueled by Death. This will just allow our consumption of corpses to give us essence back, which is huge. It's a huge resource regen that everybody should be trying to get. It also allows you to move away from Bone Prison, which is something a lot of you guys might be looking at using in your Bonespear build. Some people do, it's up to you. Most of the time it's just used for this part right here. If an enemy is trapped in the Bone Prison, gain 25 essence plus additional 5 per enemy trap. That's kind of huge. It is really nice and it works in a lot of builds. However, it does go on a decent cooldown, and it's not something that can be spammed. So instead of using Bone Prison, I go into the aspect of Corpse Explosion and then stack into Grim Harvest and Fueled by Death for more damage, more essence generation. Moving down, we want to put in 3 into Death's Reach. This is very important because we're going to be playing at a distance most of the time. So we want to stack as much damage as we can, and having extra damage from distance is important. We don't really need to have a lot of points into Death's Embrace unless we're going into a more nightmarish dungeon build, and something like this would actually benefit us because a lot of the times we're going to get mobs running in at us at a fast pace, sometimes teleporting, sometimes they spawn on top of us. We can't do anything about it. We gotta play close sometimes, and that's where having maybe a few points into Death's Embrace will actually help. So currently this is the setup I run when I'm running nightmare dungeons, so I normally put 1 point into Death's Embrace. If I really wanted to, I could take out a couple points somewhere and plug in the extra 2 just to make me a little bit, tankier. But it's not 100% necessary when you have the right setup. Moving down the list, we want Corpse Tendrils. This is very important, and the reason being is it will not only bring us the vulnerability that I was talking about earlier, but it will also pull in enemies into a pocket, which allows us to just freely feel very comfortable. We could be running into a room that locks us in with like 30 mobs and like 3 elites and be like, holy crap, I don't think I'm gonna survive this. But 1 tendril can just grab almost the whole room and put them in a pile. Then we can just Bonespear the heck out of them from range. It's very, very helpful. It also gives us the ability to target things such as the explosion from certain abilities, like Corpse Explosion, explosions from Barber, like just a bunch of different things where having them all piled up is a huge benefit. And it also allows us to get our tendrils to vulnerable like the whole room pretty much. So when the tendril goes off and pulls them into a pocket, it's also making all of them vulnerable. So it's pretty much needed. It's pretty much amazing, and I recommend going completely vulnerable right here. Some of you might be going for that blood orb, but we don't really go with blood orb build, so it's not really needed for my setup. But you know, this is where I would say get your vulnerability, and not in, you know, the initial basic attack or in your Bonespear. Those are just kind of, I guess in a way, a waste in my opinion, because I would rather be doing more damage, and having your tendril just do the vulnerability for you is a blessing. Moving down, we put in a bunch into more bone damage, so Serration for bone skills, increase your critical strike chance for each 30 essence you have upon cast. So that's an extra way to get more critical strike chance. Having more into compound fracture is something that works really good with getting extra damage from stacking your bone spear. And then Evulsion is very, very good for doing more damage to enemies that are vulnerable. When rolling your skills, such as like on your necklace, I would try to get one of these as a skill buff if you can. Unfortunately, on my best necklace for solo targeting Lilith, I actually have 3 rolls into compound fracture, which isn't horrible. If I could, I would have wanted 3 into Evulsion instead, which actually would have stacked my damage a lot higher. But you get what you get. You only, RNG is RNG, you know? So I happen to have a necklace right now that gives me at least 1 extra point into Evulsion for when I run Nightmare Dungeons, and that's why I have an extra point here. Moving on, you want to put in points into Standalone and Memento Mori, and the reason being is we're sacrificing all 3 of our minion types. We're not using any. So we want as much damage reduction from not having minions, and as much extra damage from the sacrifices as we can. So stack into there. We're trying to play the healthy build, so we're trying not to take that much damage. So the healthier we can be, which is technically 80% and higher. So as long as your health bar is at 80%, you're at the healthy state. And you'll do an extra 12% attack speed. So having this is a blessing for Bonespear, just for the attack speed buff in its own right. If you happen to drop below that 80% marker, just hit a potion and get your health back if you can. Bone Storm is something that is optional. Either you can use this, or you can use Decrepify. Those are the 2 options that I like to swap with. So for example, if I was running in the dungeon, I'd choose Bone Storm over Decrepify, and the only reason why is I'm trying to get that extra damage buff. So if you spec further into Bone Storm, you get that Supreme Bone Storm, and it gives you more critical strike chance by 20%. So an extra 20% critical strike chance, and you get damage reduction, and it does damage while around you. So technically it goes on a big cooldown. It goes on a huge cooldown. It's almost a whole minute cooldown. So there's a reason I don't use this when I'm going into fight like Lilith. I actually will respec, and I pull my point out of Death's Embrace right here, which is, you know, more damage and more reduction versus close. And I actually plug that into Decrepify, and I swap Decrepify with Bone Storm on my hotbar for when I'm actually fighting Lilith. Just because I can spam this pretty much non-stop. There's a small cooldown, but it's not huge, so it allows me to use this over and over. If I really cared enough, I could spec more out of Bone Storm and then plug in so that whenever I hit Lilith or I hit one of the mobs in the fight, I get a 1 second cooldown on my abilities. That's something you could do if you really want. I didn't think it was necessary because I didn't need to spam my abilities more than what I already have, and I can explain that because of the hearts that I have. Plus, because of certain factors, my essence was staying reasonably at 50% or higher most of the time. So I didn't really have to worry about cooldowns as much, so I only plugged in 1 point into Decrepify for the fight. And so yeah, I run Bonestorm whenever I go into Nightmare Dungeons, but Decrepify whenever I'm fighting like a boss like Lilith. That way I could get that 20% less damage taken, and I can pretty much spam it. And you'll actually notice that 40% slowed effect too, which is really nice. Finally, you go into the very last part, which is your key passive, and you put into Ossified Essence. This just means that you're pretty much going to be having a huge buff towards your bone skills for each essence that you have above 50. And it's huge. You want to make sure you try to keep your essence bar at 50% or higher at all times just to be able to get this. Not only that, but there's another aspect you roll on your gear, which is technically another buff on itself, and I'll show you that here in a second. So you want to try to keep whatever you have at least 50%. So whenever you're looking at, let's say your essence, let's say you have 250-ish essence, right? You want to keep it at the 50% or higher mark. That would be like 125 or higher on the essence bar. So it doesn't matter where the halfway part is on the bar. It depends on what number you reach. You know what I'm saying? So if I was to back out of this and we look at mine, it says currently I have 186. The halfway marker would be what? It would be like 93, right? The halfway marker would be like 93. So if I start spamming my skills, let me leave the zone real quick. Alright, so let's say I start spamming my skills, right? You see that? The halfway marker still seems to be around 100. So it could actually be a little bit lower than the halfway marker to be able to get to that 93. It's pretty close, but as long as it's somewhere just right about the halfway to the middle, maybe a teeny bit under the middle, you can technically still get the bonus of 50%. It's not 100% accurate at the middle part. So, and when you have a lot more essence, like I said, if you had like 240 or so, it would be even more noticeable that it's less than the halfway marker. So just pay attention. You don't have to know the exact number. Just know that if you see your essence bar go close to half, you want to stop spamming your core skills as much as you have in order to be able to get the most damage out of it possible. That would be a good time to swap over and start spamming your basic attack to get some of your essence back, and then you can go into just core firing again. So that covers the whole basics on skills as far as Nightmare and Lilith goes. However, I do have a lot more to show. So let's go ahead and show the Book of the Dead. As you can see, you sacrifice all three. For Skeletal Warriors, you want to factor in critical strike chance. For Skeletal Mages, you want to add more maximum essence, and that should be self-explanatory, but the reason we go into that and not into, let's say, vulnerable is just because we want to be able to spam our core skills more often. So an extra cast or two means a lot. So we definitely want to be able to get that extra damage in. Then golems, we go straight into critical strike damage. Because this build is factored on just critical strike and critical strike chance, and the higher the better. As far as my hotbar goes, I run Corpse Tendrils, Corpse Explosion, Bone Storm, or Decrepify, depending on what I'm doing, and Blood Mist. Then I have my Bone Splinters and Bonespear all right here. This is pretty much my full setup. And like I said, unless I'm fighting Lilith or something, this is what I'll have on my hotbar. You don't really have to spam corpse tendrils ever. You want to use corpse explosions whenever they're not automatically going off from your heart that you have running, which I'll explain that. So you want to be constantly hitting this to be able to get buffs. Bone Storm, you don't want to be spamming it. You only want to use this whenever you feel like you're entering a room with a bunch of mobs, or you're fighting, you know, something you feel like you need to be defensive against. Like maybe you're fighting Lilith and you have a chance to spam Bonespears, but at the same time you want to be defensive. Like it's a good time to use it. But strategically, because it goes on almost a 60-second cooldown, I don't recommend spamming it. Blood Mist you can use whenever it's up if you feel like it, but it's more of a safety net to keep you from dying. Unless you're strategically using it for more damage, like I said, it puts corpses on the ground. You're just going to use it in moments of, oh crap, you know, I need to use this so I don't die. It also is a really good way to enter a room though. I've noticed when I go through nightmares and stuff, you can go into a room and instantly hit Blood Mist, run into a group while they're trying to attack you, and then the corpses go off and pull everything into a pocket. It can get nice, especially against, you know, some of the affixed enemies and corpse bows and stuff that do insane damage. Let's go ahead and take a look at my fight with Lilith. So first thing you want to do is hit the Blood Mist in order to activate the absorption of corpses. This will give you a damage buff at the beginning, so when you start off against Lilith, you get that extra little bit of damage. You want to make sure you don't run out of essence at the beginning, and she'll jump at you, so jumping through her is a good way to dodge some of the damage you could have on your health. Making sure you hit your potion is important to keep your life max, but also pay attention to your essence, because when you do your essence, you never know if you know, you're going to run below 50%. Using your Blood Mist when she does the slam keeps you from dying, and it's very important. I take off my ring on the second phase so I don't have the tendrils and stuff automatically exploding, but right before she spawns I put it back on so that they can help tendril put vulnerability on, and I can also self-explode some of the corpses as well to get the buff continuating into that 50% more damage. If by chance you don't get Lilith to the next phase where she starts breaking the platforms without any of the, you know, orbs and blood shooting everywhere, it's a little bit hard. You want to save your Blood Mist in order to dodge that stuff, but at the same time, she has a suction ability that she does that can pretty much one-tap you if you don't get out of it, and you want to save it for that mechanic. If you get lucky enough like me to where you skip the mechanics by doing enough damage during the first or the beginning of the phase on the second half, then you might be able to just save your Blood Mist and not have to use it at all. There is a mechanic that she uses sometimes at the very end where she will spawn a shadow clone that can almost one-tap you, so you might want to save your Blood Mist until then. But yeah, that's how the Lilith fight goes, and it was pretty easy. Let's go ahead and take a look at Paragons and what I plugged in compared to maybe what you might be running, or what, you know, maybe I can give you an idea of what, you know, you might want to run. So as far as Paragons go, start at the beginning. Let me go ahead and explain, but I use 5 boards, so that's something to point out right away, just 5. Some of you might be going, why not 6? Well, there's not enough points to be able to plug into 6, and it's not needed either. So being able to run you know, Nightmare 100 and solo Uber Lilith, like, why do you need more than that? Maybe there's a board system that you like. But this is what I'm running. So let's start at the beginning. We run Sacrificial first, so we can get that 150% magic node bonus. It allows us to get the most out of having extra armor and a bunch of extra damage and willpower at the beginning. as you move up the board, you will move into using Bone Graft, and you'll be running Gravekeeper. Some people you might see running Exploit right here. I had tried it. It wasn't as good. So that's why I decided to stick with, Gravekeeper, getting that extra bonus from the rare nodes. So I get an extra, I pretty much get double the amount of bone skill damage right here and extra int. That's why I went with this. Being able to have that was huge when fighting Lilith. I tried with Exploit for that vulnerability setup. I even plugged in extra points over here to get more dex, but I didn't feel like it was better, so I didn't do it. The extra int right here isn't absolutely needed, but I went with it. So that's why I did that. Moving on, we moved into this next board, and this next board is Scent of Death. Scent of Death with Imbiber. Having this was very beneficial because, like I said, we go into a healthy build where we're trying to have our health at 80% or higher. So the extra potion healing isn't absolutely necessary, but it does help a lot because when, let's say we're fighting Uber Lilith, we take a hit, we pop a potion, it gets us to that 80% marker or higher a lot quicker, you know what I mean? So having that bonus helps, and that's how we went about with this board. You want to plug in points, for extra healthy right here. You're going to be fighting enemies where they're injured, meaning they're under 80% health, so getting that extra damage is really good. You want that extra crit, a little bit more potion healing is always awesome. I couldn't find a way to get extra willpower. Maybe you can roll it on your gear if you want that extra 15% crit strike damage, but I didn't. Scrolling up, we went into another board, which is Bloodbath. You don't really care about the overpower, that's not the point. The point of picking this board was actually to get what we have. Having that extra damage while fortified, having that extra damage while healthy. Those are the two things we wanted. And we plugged in Essence so that we could get more critical strike damage. As you can see at the top, while plugging in the nodes, we get an extra 97%. That's pretty big. And we want to stack as much critical strike damage as we can. Moving down, we actually have one more board, and this is where we have Exploit. Instead of having Gravekeeper, we put Exploit here. We also plugged into having Targeted, which is very good for elite damage. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that extra 16%, but it wasn't needed. We were able to pull off everything in the game that it has to offer without it. But if you can find a way, maybe you want to stack extra dex on gear or something, go for it. I didn't think it was necessary, so I didn't go that route. The board we are using is Flesh Eater. This is a huge node, along with the node up here, Scent of Death. Being able to have the corpse benefits is huge. So with 2 corpses nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction, which is huge in Nightmare Dungeons, because you're not going to be always spam exploding them, so you're going to get that 15% damage reduction. But with no corpses nearby, you get a 15% increased damage. So when you're fighting like Uber Lilith or fighting one of the Nightmare bosses, if you don't have corpses all over the ground, you're getting that 15% extra damage buff. Scrolling down and looking at Flesh Eater, whenever you consume 5 corpses, it grants you a 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. So, as long as you're spamming the explosions and getting that 5 corpse bonus, you're getting 40% extra damage at all times. It's huge, it's absolutely necessary when fighting like Uber Lilith, and you can thank me later. So that's huge. So this is the way that we rolled the board, and you guys can plug in, a little bit differently if you feel like you want. Some of you might go from here and rock up to here instead and say, screw this zone, it's not needed. But, you know, to each their own. That's just what I decided to go with. And, yeah, I hope that this board, you know, fills the void of where your curiosity was leading on how should I plug this in. This is massive, you know. The way that people plug in their Paragon makes a huge difference. As far as which ones should you start filling out first, I mean, you're not always going to get the same glyph drops right away. Maybe you won't get sacrificial for a while. Maybe you won't get exploit right away. So just, you know, level the ones as you get, as you see fit. And if you want to plug in other things right away, you can. Just plug in where you see fit. And then eventually, if you want to plug in the same nodes where I did, then go with it. Whatever works best for you. So let's go ahead and look at some nightmare stuff, right? T74, this should be like a cakewalk, depending on which map you get, obviously. And you should be able to carry like 4 people through this, no problem. As far as gear and stuff goes, you can see that I'm running the same setup down here I showed earlier. Looking at gear though, what am I running? So I am running with Deathless Visage. This is very, very good for Bonespear and leaves echoes traveling through the air that explode, dealing extra damage. It also helps you get that critical strike damage with bone skills. It adds physical damage because we are a physical damage build. So technically you can spec more physical damage into your gear if you want. I didn't really go that route. I went more for crit on everything. But yeah, this is pretty much a really good helmet. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's what I decided to run with. And we ran with, you know, a ruby for maximum health. I could have gotten a better roll as far as more critical strike damage, but I went with the one that had the maximum Bonespear explosion. Choose what works best for you. Went with a chest plate that has disobedience on it. Getting that extra, you know, armor stack buff is huge. And we're going to be doing damage constantly, so we want that armor stack buff at all times. Rolling into more of a damage type or a defensive type strat is up to you. I kind of went with a little bit of both. So more damage reduction while fortified, or more damage reduction while close, or more damage reduction from a distance. It's up to you. I also went with bone skill damage and total armor and just damage in general, stacked with more rubies for maximum health. As far as gloves went, I went with serration. As you know, I mentioned earlier, we want that extra damage while we have 50% or higher essence. And this is where we get another stack of it, which applies the 40% immediately on top of what we already have. So this is huge. You want to go into crit mostly if you can. You want those extra stacks of Bonespear damage if you can. And then having, you know, either lucky hit, crit, or having chance for primary resource, like whatever you roll there is up to you, but this is the way I rolled mine. As far as pants go, we went with basic skills grant 20% damage reduction. That way, whenever we have any issue where we're taking a lot of damage, we can just pop our basic and get an extra 20% damage reduction at all times. So having that is huge. I went with a defensive route, so I went reduction across the board with a little bit of more, you know, more armor. I could have gotten a lot better rolls, but hey, it wasn't absolutely needed, and that's what we went with. As far as boots, we went with Wind Striker. We want that extra movement speed because we're slow boys over here. Our necros be crawling almost. They can't sprint yet, but maybe eventually we can get up to the sprint phase. And we're trying to go from crawling to walk, so that's why we went with critical strike grants more movement speed. We want that essence reduction, obviously. If you can get movement speed, it's huge, and having a little bit of reduction is nice. extra ranks into Corpse Tendril. That's pretty big. It allows us to have more cooldowns so that we can spam it more often. And that's how I rolled my boots. As far as necklaces go, Grasping Veins all the way. You can go ahead and put that on your main weapon if you want. Some of you will, some of you think it's better. This is just what I thought was better. So I went with Grasping Veins on the necklace. And like I said, you can either go with Evulsion passive points or you can go with Compound Fracture. This one specifically I use for when I run Nightmare Dungeons. And the reason why is I needed to have something close, but at the same time have a blue socket for running the Brutal Heart that I run. So the Brutal Heart that I run for the 20% incoming damage suppression. That's really huge because we're not tanky. We're pretty much glass cannon build over here. We need as much survivability as we can because, like I said, not everything I run, like my chest, is pure reduction based. So we need a little bit of survivability, and that's something that helps make up for it. As far as skills go, we want cooldown, we want essence cost reduction. I went with bone skill damage just for the extra damage buff, but you could go for, you know, total armor or movement speed or whatever you want right there. Next we go into the rings. I went with exposed flesh. I think every build is going to be using exposed flesh. It's pretty much necessary for us to generate more essence, and we're going to be hitting vulnerable enemies all the time, so we need that as much as we can. The rolls I went for was vulnerable, critical strike damage with bone skills, and critical strike damage. I didn't think I needed the crit strike hit, so I didn't go into that. But if you really need the critical hit chance, then go with it. If you can get maximum essence or resource generation, that would be the final roll that you want. And this just happened to be the one that I got, so I kept the resource generation because I didn't want to search for a new ring. This has Barber in it. It's the Wrathful Heart that you're going to be wanting, more than likely. And the lower the roll, the better. And the reason why, hear me out, you don't want to have problems with enemies getting to you faster than what you can kill, right? So let's say you run into a dungeon and you run up into a room with mobs that are sprinting at you with God speed. You know, they're coming at you at God speed, and you're like, how the hell am I gonna move out of the way? I can't dodge that much. I have one dodge click. My movement speed is between crawl and walk, and I only have blood mist occasionally. I can't constantly be dodging these guys. So what do? You use a low rolled Barber. Why? Because you want them to be exploding as fast as possible. Some of you are going to be like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, doesn't Barber go off as soon as the mobs like die? Yes, they do. That's another thing about Barber. You kill an enemy faster than the explosion goes off, they still just explode. However, you're going to run into those elites or those mobs that have a barrier, they have suppression, they have things that are causing you to dodge their mechanics like flames and lightning and all this other stuff that you can't constantly just spam on them. You're not going to be able to kill them instantly, and in those moments you're going to thank me, because having a lower rolled Barber is where it's going to come into play. So just go with the low rolled Barber. It'll help you in the long run. On top of that, it absolutely helped me destroy Lilith. Why? Because in moments when Lilith phases off the screen, Barber continues to stack even after those 2 seconds. So you want to apply as much stack damage as possible, and it just keeps going. Yeah, you could do 4 seconds and it'll keep going too, but there'll be phases where Lilith doesn't get chunked because of the 4 seconds, and you're gonna be like, I don't understand. I watched your video, Mr. E, and you're chunking her super fast, like she's dying quickly, and that's because the barber's going off continuously, and it's because it's a low roll. So go with a low rolled barber, you'll thank me later. As far as next roll on ring goes, we went with Cadaverous. You can choose something else. I tried a couple different options. I tried standing still, adds more damage. I tried getting more essence back from primary resource and all that other stuff. Cadaverous just seemed to be the way, and the reason why is because you're already, consuming corpses throughout most fights you're doing. So that potential for up to 50% extra damage at all times is amazing, and it's something I recommend. You can roll this, on your gauntlet instead and swap them around, or you can, try other things like I said. But that extra 50% made a huge difference for my overall aspect towards defeating Uber Lilith in general, and I recommend trying it. We went with another orange heart. We went with the corpses automatically activate on equipped corpse skill every second. The lower the roll, the better. That way you're not getting huge reductions on your damage. And I even used this when fighting Lilith. I attempted to run without it. It is very insanely hard to get used to not using it. If you're using this, you'll understand what I mean. It's like almost a handicap, okay? Once you find this and you're running around in the game, you never want to take this thing off. It's like getting a God-gifted talent and saying, don't use that talent. You know what I mean? So you want to get this right away whenever you start your Bonespear Necro, and you can pop it in. You'll find it continuously. It's not a uncommon drop. It's very common. But yeah, I ran with it during the Lilith fight, and it's definitely wanted when running in Nightmare Dungeons and such as well. Obviously I went crit again. I decided once again not to go into crit chance. I didn't think it was needed. I just wanted that overall huge damage pile up. Wanted vulnerable damage, and this time I happened to find maximum essence. Even though it didn't roll high, having a little bit extra essence is awesome. As far as going into the main weapon, I know you guys are probably wondering why I didn't talk about it right away. So when running Nightmare Dungeons, or anything besides like Uber Lilith or like a world boss, I 100% recommend using a scythe. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you not want to have the extra critical damage and attack speed? Because we're not tanky. Scythe removes that critical strike damage that we get on a two-handed sword or a one-handed sword, and it applies life on kill instead. This is massive, guys. We're not tanky unless you build that into that, playstyle. We're glass cannons, and we need a way to regenerate our life, especially when we're getting constantly poisoned by spiders, and we're getting slowed, and everything that can happen will happen at some point. And when those times happen, we need to get our life back, and we don't have unlimited potions. So life on kill is a godsend, and I recommend running a scythe whenever you're running Nightmare Dungeons. You want to get pretty much everything the same as you would on like your other weapon that you would run for doing solo, but at the same time, having that life on kill is major, and I recommend it. We went with core skill damage because we're constantly throwing Bonespear. We wanted to have extra int, that's our main skill damage, so you want to roll into that if possible. Having either critical strike damage with bone skills or critical strike damage in general, whichever one you happen to roll, you can choose to go with. And having vulnerable damage, I know I didn't get a good roll, but hey, is it absolutely needed? No. So having those are the primaries that I looked for. We went into splintering. Like I said, you can choose to put that on, like, let's say your necklace instead. if you decided you wanted to run Grasping Veins on your main hand. But I went ahead and rolled with it on my main hand in order to get the 100% buff and not 50% buff. I want my Bonespear to do as much damage as possible, and we went ahead and ran with emeralds to get that critical strike damage against vulnerable enemies. So overall, this is my setup. Attack power is pretty decent. If I was running against Lilith, what would I change? All I would do was change to this two-handed sword. So now we have the same exact aspect, but with more critical strike damage and more attack speed. We no longer have critical strike damage with bone skills. We actually happen to have critical strike damage instead. That's up to you, depending on what you like. I just wanted more critical strike damage in general, so that's how I rolled it. And then you want to swap necklaces. So I swapped over to having not only different rolls, such as compound fracture and movement speed, but I also swapped to using a completely different heart when facing Lilith. So now we're using the heart that gives 80% critical strike damage, but your non-critical strike still 35% less. So that's what I'm running instead of going with the suppression, which is what I run in Nightmare Dungeons. I run with more critical strike damage when facing Lilith. So these are the only swaps really I do in gear when moving into Nightmare or anything else. I just swap these two things over and then I'm good to go. I mean, like I said, there's a couple things I swap in my skill tree, but that's about it. There's not huge changes. You're pretty much the same build across the board. Let me show you guys what it's like to run like a Nightmare dungeon. This is a 74. I know it's not like 100 like I mentioned we can do, but I don't happen to have one on me to test right now to show off. So I'll just show you the kind of stuff that we can pull off while we run around. When you're running solo, you don't even really have to have that much I guess you don't have to hold back as much. It's a lot easier to kill things when you're by yourself. The enemies aren't buffed as much. They don't seem to spawn continuously everywhere. So yeah, it's pretty easy. You can run through it, no problem. You almost don't even have to use your left hand. You can almost just walk with your mouse and hit your right click constantly whenever you run into the room. I've done it quite a few times while I was playing live for everybody. I just kind of didn't have to try that hard. Things just die really quickly. You don't have to worry about like survivability all that much. Obviously, it comes down to being able to watch your surroundings, dodge a little bit when you see things coming for you. But you're mostly a distance fighter, and you'll see yourself hitting for millions and millions and millions of damage because of Barber. Occasionally, you want to just hit your blood mist just because it's fun. You don't even have to use it to be able to get survivability out of it. You just hit it because it's fun. You like to see the corpses drop on the ground, and you want to enter a room with complete comfortability that you're not going to die when you don't see what's there, you know? So this is what it's like, guys. This could be you right now. You could be running through these dungeons like me, feeling like a god, not feeling like you have to worry about anything. And yeah, if it's up to you if you want to copy this build the way it is. But yeah, this is what I've come up with. This is what I would say try if you don't know what else to try. And I have more ideas for more builds for Necro, and I'm currently working on one right now. If it happens to work out, I will make another video on it, and I will showcase that as well. The next one's just going to be kind of more of a fun build that works towards blight and damage over time. So if you're looking forward to it, you know, maybe hit the subscription button, check my new videos that might come out coming sooner than later, and let's have fun with it, guys. I hope this video helped you. Please feel free to comment down below and let me know what you think. Till next time, though, have a good one. I hope you get lots of awesome loot drops, and go kill Lilith. Show her what you got.